One of the biggest changes to the game is how the new magic system works. Spells are significantly harder to cast, you probably know less of them, and it's much more difficult to decide which spells to pick up and also which items you want to go with. So I'm going to go through the chances to cast, talk about what sort of power level you might be looking at, what sort of items you're looking at to mitigate the issues with casting spells. I'm going to go through all of the laws, give them a provisional rating, just as a sort of off-the-cuff where I think each law stands, talk about which 4 spells from each law are now probably the best to pick as I see the game going, and then maybe have a little bit of a chat at the end about the sort of magic items you might want to pick up to overcome the issues you have with getting your spells off consistently. As a very quick note, I think if you're playing one of the Arcane Journal Armies of Infamy, which caps you at a level 2 wizard or a level 3 wizard, if you capped at a level 3 wizard, you're very happy, you know, level 3 is the new level 4. If you're capped at level 2 wizards, I think that's still super playable. So stuff like the Null Detachment, where you can only have a level 2 wizard at best, I think that's fine, but I think if you're not capped to only having level 2s, you probably want to go and get a level 3 wizard where you can, unless you're trying to do something spicy like squeezing a couple of dragons in and also getting a low level wizard for some level of magic protection. Generally, I think level 3 wizards are going to be where it's at for the meta. First, let's look at how this affects your ability or your likeliness to actually cast a spell. Along the top, and I'm going to show you 4 tables, we're going to go through them quickly, don't worry, you don't have to look at numbers. I've made the colours pretty to make it visually appealing. So along the top is your bonus to cast. So 0, that's your control, that's just your general odds of rolling the number, which is down the side. 1 is your level 1 or 2 wizards, 2 is your level 3 or 4 wizards, 3 requires you to have some additional buff, and 4 requires you to have +2 to cast over being a level 3 or level 4 wizard. So just to give us a good scale of what the realistic casting values we're going to see are. Down the bottom on the y-axis, we've got the x-axis. Down the side, we've got the casting values. So starting from 6 all the way up to 11. As far as I can tell, all of the casting values in the actual core laws of magic have been adjusted down from 11 to 10 at max, and I don't think there's anything at 6, but I've put that in just in case there is one that I've missed. It doesn't hurt to have the values there ahead of us. So if we're looking down this middle table here, you can see the casting value 2. That's where a lot of stuff's going to be, because I think we're probably still looking at running level 3, level 4 wizards. If you're casting a spell like Fireball, you've gone from being 94.4% likely to get it off, and this is before dispels, to only 77.8%. So you're looking at over 15% drop in chance of getting Fireball off. If you were, for example, talking about the Ruby Ring of Ruin, you're going from getting it off 77.8% chance to 62.5% chance. So that's a full 15% drop just from going from a +2 to a +1. Obviously, as well, in terms of casting, I would say you're actually more likely to get Ruby Ring of Ruin through compared to Dispels. So you're less likely to cast the spell, but you're less likely to get Dispelled as well. So it comes out a little bit in the wash if you're using Ruby Ring of Ruin within a Dispel range, but if you are using it sort of around the edge of the board, trying to stay out of range of enemy Dispel threats, you're pretty significantly less likely to get that off. And the item's obviously gone up in cost, so more of a question about whether it's worth it compared to how things were before. Now, so if we look here, when you get down to some of the higher level casting rolls, it becomes really, really unlikely that you're actually going to get those off. If you were playing Necromancy before, and you were looking at casting spells with, let's say, you wanted to cast a spell on 11 or a 10, we'll say 11. With your +4, before any of the modifiers, you were looking at a 62% chance, 62.5% chance to get that spell off. With modifiers, if you had, like, for example, let's say a Cascade of Souls or a Mortis Ascension, the +1 would put that up to a 77.8% chance. So you're getting it off almost 4 in 5 times, which is pretty damn good for a spell with such a high casting value. Now, if you're looking to do that without any modifiers, to cast a 10, you're only looking at a 44% chance. So before, when you were casting a spell that was going off on an 11, you had a 62% chance, and even though some of the spell laws have dropped from 11 to 10, you're still 20-odd% less likely to cast it. So you're going from casting it 3/5 of the time to casting it 2/5 of the time. So really, you're losing 50% of your chance to actually cast the spell if you're comparing from where you were to before. Obviously, the modifiers that you stack on top of that make it a little bit less dire, but we can see here that the high-level casting stuff is really hard to get off, and we're probably not going to be looking at that in terms of just sort of base level casting, you're going to have to bring some sort of modifier to get back, if you even want to get past casting anything over an 8 with any level of real consistency. So something to picture there. If we then have a quick look at power scrolls make things way easier. Now, there is a higher chance of failure. It's a 7 or 8% chance of just flat failure. I guess it's 7.4% chance that you get a double 1 on any of the 3 6s, which is, an increased chance of miscast. That does suck. Miscasts have been nerfed slightly, in that if you miscast but you roll an 8 or a 9, you still get the spell off and the specific wizard doesn't get to cast. Before, your entire battle plan could fall apart if you were a magic missile focused caster or just like a very heavy casting focused army. Anything that you rolled from 8 to 12 was going to make you less likely to cast. Now that is less of a risk that you have to play around with, because 8 and a 9 stops that wizard from casting, 10 to 12 still stops the entire army from casting. So anyway, miscasts are less problematic here, and it's the only way to get your casting values up to where they were previously. So if we look, for example, at casting a spell on a 10, now if we've got +2 to cast, we're looking at a 67.59% chance, so we'll call it 68 just for ease of maths. Previously, without a power scroll, we were looking at a 78% chance. So it's still lower, but it's starting to get closer to that level of reliability. And we're back on this is the power scroll maths, and keep in mind that this is exactly the same if you're looking at dispels, just, on the other way around. If you know that your opponent has rolled an 8 to cast the spell, you've got a +2, you want to stop it, well, you need to roll a 9, so you've got a 77% chance there with the dispel scroll. So just good to have, and I think power scrolls are going to go from being something that are very underutilized to something that are honestly a necessity if you're going to make magic a cornerstone of your battle plan. I don't love using power scrolls for magic missiles because you need quite a lot of magic missiles to get through. Sometimes it's going to be the case that you do need to actually worry about getting something onto a specific target. If your opponent has something that's unit strength 14 on an objective and you need to hit it with a fireball to stop them from scoring, sure, it's going to be worth burning the power scroll there, making sure you deny them points going forward for the rest of the game. But a lot of the time, it's going to be your big value spells, your Miasmic Mirage, your Column of Crystal, your Earthen Ramparts, all the things that are going to swing the game significantly if they go off, as opposed to just doing some damage. Even though damage is good, we've got to look at the game through a different axis because it's so much harder to bring that sort of magic missile damage to bear. Speaking of being difficult to bring damage to bear, here's a table where we're factoring in magic resist as well, and I think magic resist stocks have gone right to the moon. This is going to be something that's going to be really worth putting on all of your valuable units. We're going to be bringing more valuable units, so if you can put magic resist on unit champions, that's a very strong ability to have. If not, you really want to start thinking about having supportive characters, whether it's a wizard in a unit to buff them in other ways, whether it's a battle standard bearer who's just going to buy a couple of obsidian lodestones. There's a lot of different ways that you can stack magic resist, and it's going to be very powerful in terms of protecting your army in a way that you might struggle to protect them with, if you're only dispelling at +2. Sure, your opponent's only casting at +2, but you're still in a similar boat for trying to dispel. You're always at a disadvantage compared to them because you've got to beat their roll. So, magic resist. If we start off again, we've got the table here down the middle, 0, just the same as it was before, but we're going down to -2 because theoretically you could be a level 1 wizard and your opponent could have magic resist 3. This is unlikely. It takes triple obsidian lodestone or something like the arcane banner for high elves. You're not going to see it very often, but it is something that is possible. So realistically, I think where we're going to be sat a lot of the time is this -1 to cast or this 0 to cast. That's going to be our sort of standard level of casting. Or if we do actually look at some of the magic items that give us +1 to cast, maybe we get into the +1. So we're going to sit against magic resist a lot of the time in this little bubble here between -1 and +1 to cast. That's going to be sort of the mid ground, and you can see it gets really hard to actually get spells off. So again, you're looking to cast a fireball onto a unit that's got magic resist 2. You're a level 2 wizard. You're only getting it off 41.7% of the time, and if you're using a Ruby Ring of Ruin, forget about it, 27%. So that's basically 40% of the time, 2/5 of the time, you get it off with a normal spell, and about 1/4 of the time you get it off with the Ruby Ring of Ruin. So you're seeing that it's not going to be very effective, and just to reiterate, that is before any of the dispel rolls come in. Fated dispels, if you're casting at -1, a fated dispel is a really good thing, thing to throw out here, because you've got a lower number So even if they don't have an actual Dispel Wizard or Runesmith in range, you can find that casting at -1, you're not going to get your spells off, because even if you pass the paltry casting values, you're going to struggle there. So something to keep in mind: magic resist, you should be putting that on your units, but you've also got to plan for opponents putting it on their units as well. How can we plan for that? Well, there's modifiers. So, you know, the Jade Wand is a great one. Various armies have got, you know, options that they can go for. But again, power scrolls. Let's just have a look at power scrolls. And this looks way more healthy. So again, if you're using a power scroll, you do have the risk of just automatically failing. You've got a 7.4% chance of just blowing yourself up with a miscast. We're living with that risk. However, if you look at this table here, so let's say to get a spell off on a 9, something, because a lot of the good spells sit between that sort of 8 and 10 range. 9 is sort of the sweet spot now for where things sit. If you're looking at Magic Resist 2, but you've got a power scroll, you go from a 27.8% chance to a 53.7% chance. You're effectively doubling your chance of getting that spell off, which is really strong. It goes across, you can see, as we get to the higher values, it's going to be nigh on impossible to get the spell off anyway, but depending on what the magic resist is, this is going to be one of the only ways you're actually able to get spells off, depending on what your modifiers are. So again, power scrolls, super value, really expecting to see a lot of wizards going level 3. There's probably only 3 good spells in the lore anyway, so just pick those ones. And then also potentially picking up triple power scroll. That's 90 points of magic items, but you've saved 30 points because you haven't gone from level 3 to level 4. You only need the 3 spells anyway. You're going to be casting the ones you want consistently. This seems like the default loadout that I think people are going to go for. And it's coming in probably at around 230 to 250 points, depending on your army or whatever other modifiers that you stack on front of there, you know, mounts, or maybe you're unlucky enough to be Skaven and your wizard is super expensive to start off with. Magic Resist, I think, has gone up massively in terms of value. We've just looked at the tables where you can see that the chance of getting a spell off can go as low as halving, or, you know, it really falls off a cliff, especially as the higher value spells come in, which is often the sort of things you want to avoid. Hexes are the sort of thing where you've often got higher casting values in as well. Magic Missiles, across the board, actually relatively high values now. They were quite low, but most of them, or none of them, very few, if any, have taken reductions to casting value, and the Ruby Ring of Ruin has gone from +2 to cast to only +1 to cast. So, effectively, Magic Missiles have got fairly, significantly harder to cast, and Magic Resist is going to do a lot of value there. So stuff like Lawmaster's Cloak that gives you a ward save against Magic Missiles specifically, going to be less valuable than just going for flat Magic Resist, whereas, you know, before it was maybe 50-50. It depended what your preference was. I was a big fan of the ward save, but now I would lean towards just going for a couple of Opal Amulets. So, Magic Resist 1, I think this has value when paired with a spell. It's good in general, but I wouldn't go out my way to have it unless I was also having some sort of solid dispel threat. A level 3 wizard that's going to be in range of my opponent casting their spell. So if I'm playing like an evasive elf or empire caster, whose job is to run around, fireball, Ruby Ring of Ruin on the back of a Pegasus, or, you know, inside a unit of fast cavalry, maybe I'm not actually valuing Magic Resist super highly, or Magic Resist 1, sorry. I don't really want to be in dispel range of my opponent, because I want to get my spells off. That's more what I'm using it in. And obviously you use your tools differently in different matchups, but I'm thinking, I've picked this up, I've put all my points into trying to do damage at range, I want to try and make sure I'm doing that, not be within dispel range. So, stuff like Mark of Tzeentch actually gets a little bit interesting. Dwarves across the board have Magic Resist 1, or you can look at single Obsidian Lodestones, but that becomes less appealing. It is something you can pick up, but I'd rather be looking for Magic Resist 2 if I'm buying magic items, especially if you've got champions in the unit that you can put Magic Resist onto. Magic Resist 2, that's where you start getting to the point where that might be enough protection without the dispel ability, and this is something that does need testing. Looking at numbers, I feel relatively okay about it, but maybe we end up in a meta where all of the good casters are casting at +3, +4 anyway, at which point Magic Resist 2 is still really nice, but you still would want a Dispel threat in there. So if you can pick up Magic Resist 2 fairly cheaply, unit champions as well, you're going to get a lot of value out of that. And what am I talking about? Stuff like a couple of Opal Amulets, potentially, or Brazen Collar, Warriors of Chaos, Magic Resist 2, only 20 points, incredibly good. Witch Hunter's Ward for Empire, again, Magic Resist 2. Being able to put this on your unit champions because it's so cheap is really strong. Something that I'd be considering doing on anyone who can do it. And both of those items are extremely common, so you can repeat it across all of your units. you might not want to repeat it across all your units, but you might want to repeat it across all your important units. So you might use it 2 or 3 times, depending on what else there is in your list. Runesmiths, again, this is where we go, okay, a little bit of a dispel threat from a runesmith, now that they've had their ability to dispel buffed to an extent. A lord level runesmith, whichever the name is for that one, has a 21-inch dispel range, so it's a little bit more able to actually dispel things. They come with a flat magic resist too. You're probably not needing as many runes of spell breaking. You're going to get more value out of just the flat ability to dispel and the flat magic resist that you bring in there. So really nice buff for dwarves, especially if you're going something like Royal Host, where you might be looking at runesmiths instead of taking a Thane BSB, so really doubles up there. Prophetess, Barons, Bretonnians. If you're playing Bretonnia, your actual, magic caster, who is not the best caster in the game, they're okay. They've got some solid buff spells. They've got decent lore support. They don't have great signature spells in terms of actually getting damage out there, which is often sort of the role that I would have wanted them in before the FAQ change. Prophetess just has a flat magic resist too. You can put this in with a unit. You can put her on a royal peg. Obviously that's gone up. I think it's still really good. You can have your unit of Pegasus Knights running around with magic resist too, because you put a wizard in there who's also able to give them potentially Arcane Urgency or a ward save if you're in Exiles from Oaken Shield. Maybe you want to pair that with the regen from the Lady's Gift. There's a lot of value you can look at for stuff like that for Bretonnians. Obviously, I'll go into more detail in a specific video about Bretts later on down the line, but something to consider there. And that's the sort of thing that I'm going to be looking to put into my army. I think I might be slacking on wizards. I might take this opportunity to try and play some aggressive styles where I'm maybe not looking at wizards. I think after testing, I'm going to find that I'm going to want to come back and maybe go for a level 3 wizard, but I can definitely shave points on them. And maybe using them as an aggressive ranged damage piece is going to be less valuable because I'm expecting to see bigger units. So, magic missiles that can't pick off full units are still decent but less valuable in that situation. And also, you're less likely to get them off. So, something that I'm going to play around with, potentially, I think wizards that are there to actively dispel things, really good. Actively buff things, really good. Deal damage at range, less good than they were. And hex things are potentially less good than they were before, but the units that they're going to be having, there's going to be more things you need to deal with, whereas before it was maybe just one big unit. Now there's potentially multiple things that you need to deal with. I think the value of hexes goes up in terms of you've got more targets that you have to stop, so even though I think the hexing becomes harder, I think the value of the hexer goes up. So I still think that if you're looking for a necromancy or an illusion caster, you're still using that in a very strong way, and it's worth it indexing into, and maybe even going for a level 4 wizard, depending on what you want to do. Let's look at the laws, go through one by one, have a talk about them, what we think. So if we start off with battle magic is, I think, still solid. It's still a good pick, and there's reasons for that. But I will say it's definitely worse than it was. In my opinion, battle magic was out and out the best lore of magic in the game. Arcane Urgency, obviously incredibly strong, still is. Pillar of Fire and Fireball, it was the only lore that let you take double range damage in terms of actual consistent range damage, given that you could pick where Pillar of Fire was going, and it has quite low casting value, so it was very consistent. You could take it on lower level wizards, you could take a level 2 wizard. All of that stuff's still really good. So I would say tentatively, battle magic for me, it's gone from an S tier down to probably an A tier, and these are just rough guides in terms of where I think the numbers probably fall. I will definitely revisit this later on down the line, but gut feel, battle magic feels like it's gone from maybe the best lore to still one of the very good lores. The 4 spells that I think I'd be picking up, assuming I've gone for Lore Familiar and I'm not taking one of my signature spells. However, this is a lore that you can still roll spells in and be reasonably happy, but I think less so now that Pillar of Fire has died a death. Rest in peace. Hammerhand, it's a fairly good, I was going to say magic missile. Assailant spell, it casts on a 7, which is an incredible value add now that a lot of spells cast on an 8 or a 9, but you're only casting +2. So Hammerhand, good to have in your back pocket, and it depends how you're using the unit, but I would be picking this up as my 4th spell a lot of the time, either that or Curse of Cowardly Flight. Fireball, casting that on an 8, worse than it was, still very good, just the consistent benchmark for magic missiles, happy to have that. Arcane Urgency, reduced from a 10 to a 9, but we're only adding 2 instead of 4, so this has got harder to cast. This is something I'm still wanting to be slamming every time I can, but I'm going to be bringing Power Scrolls for it, and in this lore, I'm probably going to be looking at using the Power Scrolls specifically for Arcane Urgency. That's going to be something that's big. Oaken Shield. This is why I think Hammerhand's really good, because Oaken Shield gives your unit a 5-up ward save. The unit that you're attached to, so you do have to commit to be in the unit, gives you a 5-up ward save, but it only casts on a 7. That means, theoretically, and I'm not saying this is the way to go, you could take a level 1 wizard or a level 2 wizard, give them Power Scroll and a Lore Familiar, they can pick Oaken Shield, they can get it off fairly significantly. With it being a level, a 7 to cast, you're going to get this off more than pretty much any other spell in the game. It's a really good buff to have, and in a world where we're potentially having sticky infantry on objectives, or you're sending your cavalry to go in, but you don't want to have them all fall over to the sticky infantry, I think giving a unit a 5-up ward save is going to be very good, and I rate this very highly. Average casting value of those 4 spells, and I've not done it for the whole lore, because there's no point rating a spell that you're not going to ever take, because it's too high. This is my, rough 4 I pick. Average casting value, 7.75. You're going to be getting those off 80% of the time on average with a level 4 wizard or a level 3 wizard. So, Battle Magic, good place to start. Worse than it was, but still pretty damn good. Moving on to Demonology, we've got the Summoning, Steed of Shadows, Demonic Vessel, Demonic Vigor. This is my sort of generic pick, but things will change up. You won't be picking Steed of Shadows if you've gone for an entire cavalry army, for example. However, with these spells, which I think are pretty solid, you've got the Summoning, which comes in as a magic missile. Again, it comes in above Fireball, but it is still, 2d6 strength, 4 hits at AP1. It's a very good magic missile. It's worth fishing for that higher roll, but it's not something I'm going to be planning around. Steed of Shadows, this casts on an 8, so down from the 9 that it was before, gives a unit a 12-inch move. Why is this so good? Infantry's really slow. You can put them in marching column, you can march them 36 inches, all of the stuff that people were doing right at the start of the edition, where they were taking units of chosen warriors, putting them, with a wizard, Steed of Shadowing them up, and parking them in front of a unsuspecting unit that was very, very sad. You can now do that again, but you're probably doing it with core units, so something like your Warriors of Chaos with shields and halberds who are quite happy to be charged. That's a pretty solid buff to be looking at. Casting on an 8 means that you're getting it off fairly consistently. I really like this spell, and given that Travel Mystical Pathways has been nerfed pretty heavily, I think this is now probably the premium movement spell for infantry. It's not as good, I will say, as Arcane Urgency, in my opinion, because Arcane Urgency is able to target multiple things. You can put it on dragons, you can put it on cavalry, but if you've built your list in a way where you want to move a unit of infantry or multiple units of infantry very quickly, Steed of Shadows, great spell. Demonic Vessel and Demonic Vigor, both cast on a 9, so you can't rely on them, and both of them end but at your end of turn. So this is the thing that stops it from being an S-tier lore to me. Because you're going to be planning on being charged a lot with infantry, you're going to find that the +1 toughness that only lasts until your end of turn, and the +1 strength attacks and AP, not going to get anywhere near as much value out of that. You're going to struggle because you want to be charged, so you get 2 ranks of fighting, but if you then follow up or you cast it on your turn, you're getting less value out of it. If you stay in combat and you are, able to get extra attacks, good stuff there, but still really good spells, still a little bit hard to cast. This is where I'm going to be putting my Power Scrolls after I've made sure I'm in position for the Steed of Shadows, I think. Now, the average casting for this is an 8.75, pretty big jump from the Battle Magic lore, and this is where you start to see things become less consistent. A roughly average 66% chance of casting if you've got +2 to cast. Obviously, I'm recommending trying to get +1 casts in there on top of that as well, but it does show that it's a lot harder to cast these spells, and again, something that stops it from being quite a consistent lore, or quite as consistent a lore. You really do want some additional casting values in there to make sure you're getting this off. Moving on to Dark Magic, and this is, I think Dark Magic is a fairly underwhelming lore. So underwhelming that I've misspelled Doombolt. I could fix it, but I'm not going to. The 4 spells that I've picked here, and I did struggle, because some of the spells are really good, in that Battle Lust I think is very, very nice, although Frenzy has been nerfed. It doesn't really matter because it only lasts on your turn. But yeah, I was struggling for a 4th spell, which is why I put Doombolt on there, even though I do find Doombolt to be an incredibly underwhelming spell. What have I picked? Word of Pain. This is a hex at -1 strength and toughness at an 18-inch range, and it can be cast into combat. Can't be cast by you into combat. So if you've got a battle wizard inside a unit, you're not going to be able to cast it, but Potentially in the game of Slog, where if you're running something, again, going back to that Warriors of Chaos brick, if you're able to debuff your enemies so they're -1 strength and toughness, you're effectively, or almost certainly, giving yourself +1 to wound and -1 to be wounded. Absolutely massive hex, really worth going for, but it's the sort of thing that magic resist is going to cause you issues casting. It casts on a 10, so you're going to struggle anyway. You really need to make sure you've got some level of reliability. You know, a Skull of Catan, a Mark of Tzeentch unit that you're casting it on, for example, Power Scrolls. This is a spell that needs consistency to get off, but the value is very good. Infernal Gateway, you're going to pick up a character and teleport it away. Interestingly, this hasn't been nerfed in the way that Travel Mystical Pathways has. You can put it anywhere within 12, it doesn't have to be wholly within the way that Travel Mystical Pathways does. It's good, it's a good spell. It's conditional, because you're using it to move something that's either in combat or you're just trying to reposition, but I do like it, and I think it adds a lot of value to like a Chariot Lord who has less maneuverability, and also you're able to move before or after this spell, so quite a nice one there. Battle Lust on a 9, this is sort of the linchpin. This is why you're probably taking Dark Magic, Frenzy and Hatred, getting +1 attack on the charge, re-rolling all those attacks in the first round of combat. Just a good spell to have. Can't be cast into combat, not that the Hatred would have worked anyway, but this is going to absolutely turbocharge. Where do I see you taking this? If you're looking to crush enemy infantry, something like a unit of cavalry that can take Dark Magic, this is going to be really nice. Honestly, where this could go pretty high value, I think if you wanted to go for double Lord, for example, if you wanted to go double Chariot Lord for High Elves, you could look at taking the Stormweaver, which is a level 3 wizard. Previously that was a downside, now you're not really bothered about it being level 3, so something like that, giving it to the Dragon Princes that are charging in, really nice value. Finally, we've got Doombolt, which is a magic missile cast on an 8, but it's a small blast template, so it's going to do a lot less damage than its comparable, you know, magic missile friends. It's fine. And it's also got a high casting value. We're looking at a 9 there, so you're only getting spells off 63% of the time, which is fine. That's more than half. It's significantly more than half. It's almost 2/3 of the time. That 1/3 of the time is going to suck, so yeah. Make sure you're packing Power Scrolls. I'm going to say that every time, I think. Every time I come through a lore, I'm going to go, and Power Scrolls. Elementalism. This is, in my mind, one of, if not the best spells. There are 2 that I have up in S tier, and I think this is possibly the better of the 2. Even though Travel Mystical Pathways got nerfed. What do we get? We get Plague of Rust, which is a cast on a 9. It's a hex. It casts into combat. Now, yes, magic resist is going to make this very hard to go off, but it's a 9 instead of a 10, so you've got a little bit more wiggle room there. You're still going to be wanting to cast to that with a Power Scroll. AP -2 will turn all of those hand weapon and shield attacks into AP2 hand weapon and shield attacks, or AP3 if you're like Lizardmen, or if you're Warriors of Chaos, something like that. So a really nice spell to have. On the flip side, Earthen Ramparts, which was a 10, has become a 9. Earthen Ramparts got an absolutely massive glow up. It was good already. 5-up ward save. You can't march or charge. Sure, that's fine. We've got another way of getting around that. But you count as defending a low linear obstacle. So your opponent loses the initiative for charge, which is good enough on its own. I really want to stack this with something like Swordmasters, who can then just cleave the opponent. Remember that if you're charged and you're infantry, you're getting 2 ranks worth of attacks. If you've got something that gives you plus initiative, you're probably going before your opponent. Really strong combo to go for. It also means that you don't count as being in base-to-base contact, and this is something that's currently being argued or discussed, so if you come back in a month's time and that's not the current consensus, fair enough, but I'm fairly confident in saying you don't count as being in base-to-base, so no stomps, no impact hits, and everyone only gets to make a single attack per model. Now, mounts count as a separate model, so the Lord would make an attack and the Dragon would make an attack. But this is an absolutely huge defensive buff, and if you can get it off, it's going to keep units really safe. Why do we want to keep units safe? We want to stand on objectives. We want to score loads of points. Earthen Ramparts, probably the best defensive spell in the game. You just need to get it off. And you can't cast it into combat, so better make sure that you win combat, or you've got something to back up the unit that's going to be locked in there. Because if you get locked in enough of a struggle, you'll win the first round and then maybe lose on round 2 or 3, which is not what you want. Wind Blast, a nice magic missile. It's fine, casts on an 8, does less damage than Fireball into some targets anyway, but it does give a little bit of a reposition, moves your opponent back a couple of inches. Nice to have, just a good magic missile. Finally, Travel Mystical Pathways, casts on a 10. Your unit has to be wholly within 12 inches of where it started. It's still really good. It's more mobility than an infantry unit's going to have previously. You can get up the board quite nicely. You can change your facing without it being a maneuver. A lot of value to it, but it is worse than it was, which is good, because I think it was too abusable, especially with the big units, and we might see resurgence of big units because we want to hold objectives. Average casting value was 9, so again, we're looking at 63% chance to get the spell off, which is fine, but this is one that you really, really want to be looking at power scrolls, because there's a lot of stuff in here that's super valuable, and you absolutely want to be getting off every time you cast it. If you're casting it, it's because it's valuable. Don't want to mess that one up. High Magic. High Magic is a conditional buffing law, and that is fine. It has gained some value. Drain Magic and Walk Between Worlds are arguably better than they were, but they're also harder to cast than they were. So it's kind of a little, a little column A, little column B. It's hard to say whether that makes it better, and it was already a little bit of a mediocre lore. The 4 spells I've picked are Drain Magic. Now, Drain Magic, I'll forgive you for not knowing what that does, because you probably haven't seen it before. It's the signature spell, Self-Range Hex, remains in play, enemy wizards within 24 inches, increase the spell's casting value by 2 whenever they try to cast. So you can stack that with Magic Resist, and you're in 24 inches as well, so you're able to try and dispel. Makes it really hard for people to get spells off now that they're only casting with +2 for a level 4 wizard, or level 3. Walk Between Worlds, this is really nice. It gives you Ethereal and Reserve Move. Reserve Move is huge if you are looking at playing infantry, because you get to do open order pivots if you're playing an open order unit. I guess it doesn't matter if you're close order, but it gives you some really nice value if you're, if you've got those pivots as well. Ethereal is nice as well. I think we're going to see less magical output in terms of less magic missiles. We'll probably see the same number of magical attacks in terms of Warriors of Chaos are going to stay very popular. Actual magic weapons are going to still be very good, although probably less Ogre Blades. But you're going to find that you're able to tank the output of a lot of things. You can't charge and cast this spell, which is a downside, but if all you want to do is put some static combat res on an objective, if you can consistently get this off, which, good luck, it's a 10, this is going to be a very solid plan in terms of gaining and holding objectives, getting a lot of points out of it. The next 2 spells are a little changeable, and it kind of depends what you want to go for. Tempest is a magic vortex that casts on a 9, so that's not super consistent, but within 6 inches of the template, enemy units treat open ground as dangerous terrain and difficult terrain as dangerous terrain. Sorry, open to difficult, difficult to dangerous. Not sure if I said that right. Why is that good? Well, if your opponent's playing infantry, they probably have base 4 move. If they've got base 4 move, they're going to really struggle to get where they want to when they're losing an inch of movement. Even in marching column, they go from moving 12 inches to 9 inches, so there is a nice buff there. Also, if people are bringing large units because they've got, potentially high, they want to hold objectives with high unit strength, so they've got a lot of models in the unit. If they're moving into terrain, that terrain becomes dangerous terrain. They have to take lots of dangerous terrain tests. You can potentially kill a good chunk of cheap, not particularly worthwhile models with dangerous terrain tests, which will add up over time. Is it going to win you the game on its own? Probably not. Is it going to be really funny when they take loads of damage and then accidentally panic because half the unit died? Oh, it's going to be hilarious. That'll be very, very funny. Fury of Cain as well. Casts on a 9, and this gives the target-friendly unit extra attacks 1. It's fine. It's not exciting. The fighting rank, I initially thought that the second rank of models in infantry got all of their attacks. That is incorrect. They only get 1 attack because they're not in base-to-base contact with the enemy. But if you've got something like Swordmasters that's 6 wide, you can go from having 12 attacks to having 18 attacks. It's still pretty solid, and it works really well if you're looking to crush something with cavalry. So again, Dragon Princes as an example really do like Fury of Cain. They get an extra attack on the horses, they get an extra attack on their Strength 5 lances, helps them punch through, potentially get you closer to crumbling that big unit of undead. Here's the big downside for High Magic. It has one of the highest casting values on average across the board. 9.25, meaning you're getting your spells off less than 60% of the time on average. You really, really need your, power scrolls, your +1 to cast, whatever. If you're playing High Elves, you do get a reroll in there, so you get some consistency added. An extra reroll is some good reliability on top of that, but when you want Walk Between Worlds, you really want it, and I kind of want it for 4 or 5 turns of the game. I think that is likely what it's going to be. This is more into like shooting matchups, so I think I'm going to struggle to get enough value out of High Magic to want to take it consistently, but I'm going to play around with it because you can do some fun stuff like a Warhawk Star. Moving on to Illusion. Now, Illusion, I think, is an incredible lore. You've got some great spells, and you've got some great spells that aren't too high casting. Some of the stuff's really high, but Glittering Robes, really solid lore. Obviously, just giving you a flat -1 to be hit. If you're looking at having an infantry character, or again, a cavalry wizard, bunkered inside one of those units, this is going to add a lot of value because we're potentially looking at more value with more attacks coming in from stuff like infantry. So this can really change things in terms of defensive profile. You will have to make sure you're buying actual defenses for the unit, but giving the -1 to hit so the the whole thing is harder to hit. Great stuff overall. Column of Crystal, really good spell already, infinitely tall, blocks line of sight. A little bit worse now because it's harder to cast, and also it's easier for your opponent to dispel. They can dispel from the column instead of actually from themselves. However, it's going to be such a pain for infantry to move around. A dragon can at least, move sideways and then still move forwards 3 or 4 inches. The unit of infantry is going to spend its whole turn moving sideways and not really do anything else. So this is going to be a real pain in the backside. Miasmic Mirage, also incredibly strong. This is a hex. This is a hex with a casting value of 9. Magic Resist is going to make it quite hard for you to get that spell off, but if you do, again, reducing the movement of an infantry unit by 2, stopping it from marching, that's absolutely backbreaking. You've got an infantry unit that moves 2 inches, 1 inch if they're a dwarf, so really strong there. And then we've got, I struggled for the last spell. You might say it's Spectral Doppelganger, I think it probably isn't, but Confounding Convocation. Cast on a 9, it's fine. You can make a unit stupid. I'm probably not going to want to waste a power scroll on this, so it's going to go off pretty inconsistently, but making your opponent stupid, if it's a unit that doesn't have great leadership, is potentially quite good. Now that stupid has more punishing interactions in that you can't move at all, you don't score secondary points as well. So being able to turn off scoring into your opponent's Death Star, while it won't be consistent, if it does go off, is quite nice. And this is something that pairs really well with Necromancy if you want to go for a pair of casters, reducing that leadership as well. Casting values, 9. Again, we're looking at roughly 2/3 of the time you're going to get your spells off, which feels high, but it is, as in, it feels like the values are high, but it's pretty much sort of the baseline for what I would say a lot of the good laws are, so not too bad for Illusion. Moving on, we've got Necromancy, and Necromancy is the other S-tier lore I have in here. I think it's really good. I think Tomb Kings especially will like this because the casting value of their lore has gone down as well. Vampire counts are going to struggle a little bit more, but both of the undead do have weight to boost their casting rolls, so I'm not too sad for them in terms of the legacy vampire counts not getting touched in terms of their Van Hells, etc. Starting off with Unquiet Spirits, this is a really good magic missile. 3d6 strength 2 hits with no armor saves is super valuable. We're going to see more infantry that's leaning on its armor, and a lot of that armor is going to be in melee, but it's still going to have, a 4-up or a 5-up armor save, depending on what you're working with. Turning that off, if you're winning on 5s, it's very good value. If you're winning on 6s, it's fine. And as always, really, really strong into Knights, which is going to be one of the counters for Undead. So if you're playing Vampire counts especially, I think this is a really good pickup to have. Spectral Steed. You can put, give a character fly 10 and ethereal. Hell yeah, fantastic stuff. What are we going to stack that with? We're going to stack it with Banshees, because Banshees like to fly forwards, do a scream 8 inches away, fly backwards. Just a really nice combo, but otherwise it's just nice. Again, we're potentially seeing less magic missiles in the meta, so having a character that can fly around as an also ethereal is good. Maybe you look at having some sort of melee character with this. Probably not. There are other ways to do it for Vampire Counts and Tomb Kings. Both have good melee options, but something to play around with. Since it's a remains in play spell, you do end up keeping that movement, and on subsequent turns you can use that movement to get a longer charge with a combat character. Spiritual Vortex, again, still really good. Again, a little bit nerfed because it's a vortex and it's going to be easier to dispel because of the range of the spell. However, this is such a good spell when you're trying to get through so many wounds. When a dragon can't just absolutely ruin a unit of infantry anymore, when you've got to get through huge bricks of wounds if people are bringing big units of infantry, lowering the leadership value so that they're more likely to actually break and flee is incredibly valuable. Turning off the general's leadership so that the unit is more likely to break and flee, incredibly valuable. This is one of the best spells in the game, and I think it only gets better now, even with the Vortex nerf. So, huge fan of this, and it's a massive template that you can use to control the board in terms of a bit of difficult terrain, making it difficult for your opponent to move through. Finally, we've got Spirit Leech. This is the same as Spiritual Vortex. It's only cast on an 8. It's a hex. It reduces the target unit's leadership by 2, and they can't use Inspiring Presence. All of the things that I just said about Spiritual Vortex, exactly the same for Spirit Leech, but it's a single target spell. So it's affected by magic resist, but it's only cast on an 8. This thing's fantastic. Necromancy's fantastic. It's high casting value, but again, if you're bringing Necromancy, you're probably bringing either Tomb Kings or Vampire Counts, which means you probably have extra pluses to cast, which makes it a little bit better. You're still probably going to want to bring some Power Scrolls, so eating into that defensive item budget for sure. Then, finally, in terms of the laws of magic that we're looking at here today, the standard 8 that all armies can pull from, we've got War Magic. War Magic is okay. It has a good range of spells, and I'd say it's an A. I think there's 3 spells that are very good. Bad Moon Rising, Evil Sun Shining, here we go. Vindictive Claire is fine. It's sort of definitely the 3rd spell. But you've got a magic missile that does multiple wounds. You've got a spell that gives you, additional AP on your attacks. It gives you rerolls of 1s to, I believe it's hit on the Evil Sun Shining. You've got a spell that gives you additional charge range from Here We Go. This is very valuable when you're looking at infantry, because infantry have much shorter threat ranges. If you're only a 4-inch move unit, you can only declare a charge 6 inches away, 10 inches away, so 4 plus 6. Having an extra 3 inches of declarable range on your charge is absolutely huge, and it's really going to help when you're in that sort of push-pull of 2 infantry units staring at each other, sizing each other up, trying to decide who's going to move into charge range first. So, really nice spell to have there. And Bad Moon Rising as well. This is a spell that not only reduces your opponent's weapon skill, it also hits their initiative, which means that if you are being charged, you can combo it with potentially spears to make sure you're striking before them, or you can do things where you can make sure you're striking first with great weapons on the charge as well. The minus to weapon skill is really nice as well. If you're looking at something like Black Orcs with the big red Raggedy Flag, which gives you +1 weapon skill, if you can get your enemy down to weapon skill 2, rolling well on the Bad Moon Rising, you're going to be hitting on 2s, you can combo that with the Evil Sun Shining. Suddenly you're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, you're probably wounding on 2s, rerolling 1s as well. Really great stuff in there. Of course, if you are playing Orcs and Goblins, if you're playing Goblins, you're probably looking for Itchy Nuisance for the signature spell. But some great spells here in War Magic. I'd say it's a pretty solid spell. It does what you want to do, which is get your units into combat, and when they get into combat, they're going to do more. So I'd say it's very solid, supporting what you want to do for Orcs and Goblins. Gives you an average casting value of just under 9. Again, you're looking at roughly a 2/3 casting chance there. So, but again, Orcs and Goblins, they've got the mob rule on their Orc casters, which gives them just a flat +1 to cast if they're in a unit strength 10 plus unit of Orcs. Unit strength 10. Man, where have I heard that before? Well, it's the thing that's incredibly important for core. So I think we're going to see a lot more Orc casters compared to the Goblin casters we had before. But Goblin casters still really nice. Something that we're going to pair in. So between those laws, I think there's a lot of really strong stuff in here. And I'd say there's a lot of good laws. And I'm re-evaluating what I want from a magic caster. I want less of the direct damage, potentially. And I want more of the buffing. Probably less of the debuffing as well, because it's going to be harder to get off as people start putting more and more magic resist into their lists. Finally, before we wrap up, just as a quick look at the arcane items in the main book, and there's going to be plenty of ones that you can take specifically for armies, so we'll maybe talk about those a little bit in a second. What sort of stuff are you looking at in the arcane journal? The arcane items. It's not the feedback scroll or the scroll on transmogrification, they're fine. But the Wand of Jet at 45 points give you +1 to cast and or dispel. However, if you roll any natural double when we're making a cast or dispel roll, the Wand of Jet is destroyed and it can't be used again. So that's a little bit rough. So this is 1 in 6 chance that you're going to lose the +1. Where do I like this? I like this on a wizard that either wants to cast one very important spell, so you'd probably pair this with a couple of power scrolls or something like that, but that very important spell probably has to be either a signature spell or one of your faction signature spells, because you're probably level 3, even if you're level 4, just dry rolling 4 spells so you can get a +1 to cast, it does feel pretty rough. So if you've got a really good signature spell, looking at you something like Chaos Dwarves, where it's really worth getting that +1 to cast, but all you're super worried about casting is 1 or 2 spells a turn, dispelling the important spell, maybe choosing not to roll, a dispel for this caster if it's going to be something that you're not super bothered about stopping, like a fireball into a big brick of Chaos Dwarves. this is something that's really good if you've got a very specific use case. You know, it's a decent dispel item, it's a decent cast item, but make sure you're not casting too many spells, because even if you don't use the bonus, you do lose the +1 to cast and dispel if you roll any double. So, something to keep in mind. Lore Familiar, I think this is going to go from being... At the start of the edition, everyone was using it. Then, when they clarified in the FAQ that you couldn't take your faction signature spells with it, a lot of people stopped taking it. Now, I think, unless you've got a spell familiar, you're probably going to be taking Lore Familiar most of the time. Just having 3 spells, or even 4 spells, is not enough to consistently get the stuff that you want. And I think, with Pillar of Fire nerfed, I would say there are less laws that you're happy to just dry roll 4 spells into. Sometimes that's going to be the best that you can do, but it does mean that there's probably a stronger choice in just taking the Lore Familiar and then taking 2 to 3 Power Scrolls to make sure you're getting the spells off that you want to pick up. Dispel Scrolls as well. I think Dispel Scrolls are really going to be powerful. Magic is now, in my mind, going to be more limited to the stuff that actually matters. So if you're bringing someone to stop magic happening, that's a pretty valid way of building magic defense now. You might go something like Wand of Jet and a couple of Dispel Scrolls and just say, I don't want you to have your key spells. We're going to stop those. Arcane Familiar, in my eyes, this goes down in value. This is something that people were only really running in terms of Empire Wizards. You'd go 3 Empire Wizards, you'd take Battle Magic on them, and you'd give one of them the Arcane Familiar, give them a single spell from Demonology so they could pick that signature spell, have an extra magic missile. Now you're probably rolling 3 spells, or you're not spamming level 4s. I think this has gone down in value. I didn't use it before, but I think it'll be used even less. And then we've got Earthing Rod as well. That's pretty solid. What sort of items are you looking at in terms of your factions then? Well, stuff like Warriors of Chaos, who have the Skull of Catan, which is a 60-point magic item, giving you a bubble of +1 to cast for all wizards. That's going to be incredibly powerful. Can be stacked with a Tzeentch Bunker, so you can get all of your wizards casting at +4. If you've got, say you've got a level 4 and a level 3, both of them can cast at +4. Even your level 2 wizard can cast at +3, so really strong bonuses to cast there. Otherwise, Dispel items, I think, are going to be incredibly good. The Prayer Icon of Quenelles, the Oaken Stave, all of these items that give you increased reliability in terms of stopping enemy spells, I think will be really valuable, because, again, we're going to see a lot of people going for spellcasters only for, I'm going to cast the one spell I really care about, and then the rest of the time they're going to be maybe just there as a dispel threat or adding magic resist to your unit, whatever you decide to go with. Speaking of magic resist, if you're going for a wizard, you might keep them more cheap now, but you can also use them as a caddy for magic resist. A great way to do this is to give them the Spell Eater Axe, 35-point magic item, combined with the ability to dispel. You can just stick that in a unit that you want to protect, and that's going to be much harder to interact with than anything really that we saw prior to the 1.5 changes. So it's a really strong way to add extra defense if you're playing more of a Death Star style where you've got one specific unit that you don't want to be affected. Obviously it doesn't stop Vortex spells and stuff, but Vortexes have been generally nerfed and you've got more play to get rid of them, so not too much of an issue there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Ground Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.